rain tapped softly against the windows of the crowded restaurant as people laughed, ate, and celebrated another busy Friday night in downtown Chicago. At a small table near the back sat a tired single father and his young daughter. His jacket was old. His shoes were worn. But the little girl beside him smiled like she was sitting in the finest place in the world. At the center of the restaurant, surrounded by wealthy clients and expensive wine, sat one of the youngest CEOs in the city. Confident. Successful. Admired by everyone around her. But within the next hour, she would learn a lesson that no amount of money could ever buy. Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below for more emotional stories from Kindness Unlimited. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world that kindness still matters. Marcus Hill looked down at the menu and quietly counted the money in his pocket. He had exactly $38. Just enough for dinner and dessert if they were careful. "Dad, can I get the chocolate cake tonight?" his 8-year-old daughter Lily asked with hopeful eyes. Marcus smiled warmly. "If we share one slice, absolutely." Lily grinned and hugged his arm. To her, her father was the strongest man alive. Life had not been easy for Marcus. 3 years earlier, his wife had passed away after a long illness. Since then, Marcus had worked 2 jobs while raising Lily alone. During the day, he repaired equipment for a local warehouse. At night, he sometimes worked security training contracts when companies needed extra help. He was exhausted most days, but he never let Lily feel it. Across the restaurant, CEO Vanessa Cole was entertaining investors from New York. At only 34 years old, she had built one of the fastest-growing private security firms in the country. Her company protected celebrities, executives, and government officials. Everyone admired her sharp business mind. But success had slowly changed her. As Vanessa stood to greet another client, she accidentally bumped into a waiter carrying drinks. A glass tipped over, splashing water across Marcus's old jacket. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," the waiter panicked. Marcus calmly grabbed napkins. "It's all right. Accidents happen." But Vanessa glanced over and frowned. The wet jacket, the tired face, the cheap clothes, she judged him instantly. She rolled her eyes and muttered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Some people really shouldn't come to places they can't afford." The restaurant became quiet. Marcus froze for a second. Lily looked down at the table, embarrassed. The waiter looked uncomfortable. It was my fault." But Vanessa continued. "I mean, honestly, this is supposed to be a professional atmosphere." Marcus slowly stood up. He could have argued. He could have shouted. But instead, he simply placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "It's okay," he told her softly. "Don't let rude people ruin a good night." Vanessa laughed lightly before returning to her investors. But one man at her table kept staring at Marcus carefully. It was David Reynolds, the head of operations for a major corporate client. His eyes narrowed as if he recognized him. A few moments later, David quietly excused himself and walked toward Marcus's table. "Sir, are you Marcus Hill?" he asked carefully. Marcus looked surprised. "Yes." David's face lit up immediately. "I knew it. You trained our emergency response teams 5 years ago." Marcus smiled modestly. "That was a long time ago." David shook his head in disbelief. "Long time ago or not, you're the reason our staff survived that warehouse hostage situation in Denver." Several nearby diners looked over. David continued, "Your training saved lives." Vanessa slowly turned in her chair. "What are you talking about?" she asked. David looked directly at her. "Marcus Hill is one of the best tactical instructors in the country. Half the security methods companies use today came from his training programs." Vanessa's confident smile disappeared. David added, "Including yours." The table fell silent. Vanessa blinked. "What?" David nodded. "Your entire executive security division was originally trained using Marcus's protocols before your company even expanded nationally." Now everyone was staring. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the attention. "It was just work," he said quietly. But David shook his head again. "No. You train people to stay calm under pressure, protect innocent lives, and treat everyone with dignity." Vanessa suddenly remembered something. Years earlier, when she first launched her company, she had attended a private security seminar taught by a former military trainer. The instructor spoke about discipline, leadership, and respect. That instructor was Marcus. Back then, she had admired him deeply. And tonight, she had mocked him in front of his daughter. Vanessa slowly stood and walked toward Marcus's table. Her face had completely changed. For the first time that evening, she looked unsure of herself. Lily held tightly onto her father's arm. Vanessa looked at Marcus and spoke quietly. "I owe you an apology." Marcus remained calm. Vanessa glanced at Lily before continuing. "I judged you without knowing anything about you. And I embarrassed your daughter. That was cruel." The restaurant stayed silent as people listened. Marcus looked at Lily, then back at Vanessa. "You know," he said gently, "when I train people, I always told them something important. The strongest person in any room is usually the one who stays kind when others are not." Vanessa lowered her eyes. "I forgot that somewhere along the way," she admitted. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Lily quietly asked, "Dad, can we still get cake?" The entire restaurant burst into soft laughter. Marcus smiled warmly. "Of course we can." To everyone's surprise, Vanessa pulled out a chair and sat beside them. She told the waiter, "Dessert for everyone at this table. And bring the biggest chocolate cake you have." Lily's eyes widened with excitement. As the cake arrived, Vanessa listened while Marcus talked about raising Lily alone, working long hours, and trying to teach his daughter to stay kind no matter how difficult life became. Vanessa felt ashamed listening to him. She had spent years building a company focused on protection and strength, yet she had forgotten the most important lesson of all, kindness. Before leaving, Vanessa handed Marcus a business card. "I know you probably don't want anything from me," she said honestly. "But if you would ever consider helping train my leadership team personally, it would be an honor." Marcus smiled politely. "Only if you promise me one thing." "What's that?" she asked. "Teach your people that respect matters more than status." Vanessa nodded immediately. "I promise." As Marcus and Lily walked out into the rainy night, Lily slipped her small hand into his. "Dad." "Yeah." "You were nicer to her than she deserved." Marcus smiled softly. "Maybe," he said. "But kindness is most powerful when people least expect it." Vanessa watched them leave through the restaurant window. And for the first time in years, she realized success meant nothing if you lost your humanity along the way. Sometimes the people we overlook are carrying wisdom, pain, and strength we cannot imagine. A kind word can heal someone. A cruel one can wound deeply. That's why every moment matters. Because in the end, people may forget your money, your title, or your success, but they will always remember how you treated others. And sometimes, one act of kindness can change a heart forever. The little girl held her father's hand tightly as they walked into the fancy restaurant. People turned to stare at the man's worn jacket and old boots, but he ignored every look. His daughter smiled up at him like he was the richest man in the world. Across the room, a powerful CEO watched them with cold eyes. She had no idea that the quiet single dad she was about to humiliate was once the man who trained her entire security team and helped save lives she knew nothing about. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Welcome to Kindness Unlimited, where every story reminds us that kindness can change someone's life forever. Marcus Reed looked down at the menu carefully while his 8-year-old daughter Emma sat beside him coloring on a paper placemat. The restaurant was beautiful, filled with soft music, sparkling lights, and people dressed in expensive suits. Emma looked up with excitement in her eyes. "Dad, are we really eating here?" Marcus smiled warmly. "Just this once." Emma grinned. "This feels like a movie." Marcus laughed softly, though deep inside he worried about money. He had been working double shifts for months after losing his second job. Since his wife passed away 3 years earlier, life had become a daily battle of bills, school lunches, and sleepless nights. But tonight mattered. Emma had gotten first place in her school science fair, and Marcus promised he would take her somewhere special, even if it meant spending nearly all the money left in his wallet. At another table near the center of the restaurant sat Vanessa Blake, one of the youngest CEOs in Chicago. Her private security company had become worth millions in only a few years. Reporters called her fearless. Business magazines called her brilliant. Vanessa enjoyed attention. As she spoke loudly with investors, she noticed Marcus and Emma sitting quietly nearby. She frowned slightly. The man's old jacket looked out of place beside the expensive furniture and polished glass tables. When the waiter arrived, Emma pointed excitedly at the menu. "Dad, can we share the chocolate cake later?" Marcus smiled. "Absolutely." Vanessa overheard them and smirked. A few minutes later, a waiter accidentally bumped into Marcus's chair while carrying drinks. Water splashed across Marcus's sleeve. "I'm so sorry, sir," the waiter said nervously. Marcus quickly stood. "It's all right. Don't worry about it." But Vanessa suddenly laughed under her breath. "Maybe some people should stick to diners instead of high-end restaurants," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. The room became quiet. Emma looked down at the table in embarrassment. Marcus slowly turned toward Vanessa. She crossed her arms confidently. "This place has standards," she added coldly. The waiter looked uncomfortable. It was my mistake." Vanessa shrugged. Still, Marcus could feel everyone watching him. Years ago, he might have reacted differently. But life had taught him patience. He gently placed his hand on Emma's shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered to her. "Kind people don't need to prove anything." Emma nodded quietly. At Vanessa's table sat an older man named Robert Hayes, a retired military officer who now worked with her company. The moment he looked at Marcus, his eyes widened with surprise. He stood up immediately. "Marcus Reed?" he asked. Marcus looked confused for a second before recognizing him. "Robert? It's been years." Robert suddenly smiled with respect. Vanessa looked confused. "You know him?" Robert turned toward her slowly. "Know him?" he repeated. "This man trained half our executive security division." Vanessa blinked. Robert continued. "Marcus trained some of the best protection teams in the country before he left the industry." Several people nearby started listening carefully. Vanessa looked shocked. "Wait, Marcus Reed?" Robert nodded. "The same Marcus Reed whose emergency response methods are still used by our company today." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the attention. "It was a long time ago," he said quietly. But Robert shook his head firmly. "No. People are alive today because of what you taught." Vanessa's face slowly lost its confidence. Years earlier, when she was just starting her company, she had studied security leadership programs built around Marcus Reed's famous training system. She remembered hearing stories about a calm instructor who treated everyone with respect no matter their status. And now she had mocked him in front of his daughter. Emma looked up at her father proudly. "You trained security teams?" she asked. Marcus smiled gently. "A long time ago." Robert laughed softly. "Your dad was one of the best instructors I've ever seen." Vanessa suddenly felt ashamed. For years she had focused on power, wealth, and reputation. Somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing people as human beings. She slowly stood and walked toward Marcus's table. The restaurant was silent again. Vanessa took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. Marcus looked at her calmly. She glanced toward Emma before speaking again. "I judged you because of your clothes and your situation. I was rude and disrespectful." Emma stayed close beside her father. Vanessa's voice softened. "And I embarrassed your daughter. I'm truly sorry." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus finally smiled a little. "You know," he said gently, "during training sessions, I always taught one lesson before anything else." Vanessa listened carefully. Character matters more than status. His words hit her hard. Marcus continued softly. "Anyone can look important. But kindness shows who you really are." Vanessa lowered her eyes. She realized that despite all her success, she had forgotten the simplest lesson of all. Treat people with dignity. Emma suddenly looked at her father with a small smile. "Dad," she whispered, "can we still get the chocolate cake?" Marcus laughed softly. "Of course." To everyone's surprise, Vanessa smiled too. She looked at the waiter. "Actually, bring them the biggest cake in the restaurant. And put dinner on my bill." Marcus immediately shook his head. "That's not necessary." "I know," Vanessa replied quietly. "But I'd like to do something kind for once tonight." Emma's face lit up with excitement when the giant chocolate cake arrived at the table. As they shared dessert together, Vanessa listened while Marcus talked about raising Emma alone after losing his wife. He spoke about hard days, second jobs, and trying to teach his daughter to stay hopeful no matter how difficult life became. Vanessa felt tears forming in her eyes. Marcus had every reason to become bitter. Instead, he chose kindness. Before leaving the restaurant, Vanessa handed Marcus her business card. "If you ever decide to return to training," she said sincerely, "my company would be honored to work with you." Marcus smiled politely. "I'll think about it." Then Vanessa looked at Emma. "You have an amazing father." Emma smiled proudly. "I know." As Marcus and Emma walked toward the door, the entire restaurant seemed quieter than before. People no longer saw an exhausted single dad in old clothes. They saw a man of strength, wisdom, and dignity. Outside, rain still fell softly onto the city streets. Emma slipped her hand into her father's. "Dad." "Yes." "Why were you still nice to her after she was mean?" Marcus looked down at his daughter and smiled warmly. "Because kindness matters most when someone least deserves it." Emma thought about his words carefully as they disappeared into the rainy night together. Inside the restaurant, Vanessa stood silently by the window watching them leave. For the first time in years, she understood something money could never teach her. Success means nothing if you lose your humanity. Every person we meet is carrying battles we cannot see. A little kindness can heal embarrassment, loneliness, and pain in ways we may never fully understand. And sometimes, the people we judge the fastest end up teaching us the greatest lessons of all.